Our next guest is Adam Nedeff. Adam grew up in West Virginia. He spent his childhood more interested in late-night comedy and game shows than afternoon cartoons. He majored in radio and television at Marshall University and spent a few years toiling as a disc jockey before moving to Los Angeles to see if he could make a career out of his childhood obsessions. He's appeared as a contestant on 3 game shows, worked behind the scenes for Wheel of Fortune, The Price is Right, and even co-founded a small business, Home Game Enterprises. The website is homegameenterprises with a Z.com, which stages live game shows for private parties and corporate functions. With encouragement from late-night star Conan O'Brien, he finally began writing books about game show history, starting with Quizmaster, a comprehensive biography of the beloved game show host Bill Cullen, and followed that with a 4-volume set called This Day in Game Show History. Without any further delay, let's go ahead and get Adam on the line. Adam, good evening. Welcome to K-Talk and the Fringe Radio Show, my friend.
Hi there. Thank you very much for having me.
I went through all your stuff, Adam, and again, I want to thank you. I know you've got a very busy schedule, a lot going on, and I truly appreciate you giving us an hour tonight. I love game shows myself, and just a little side story, because I definitely want to hear about your history. But when I was a young kid, I'm in my mid-50s. My parents took me to New York City. My dad was in the tire and leasing business, and I had a chance to go to New York City. I actually have some photographs of me as a little kid there when the World Trade Center was being built, when the Twin Towers were built. I have a picture of me in front of the Statue of Liberty with the Twin Towers being built behind me to give you a little bit of dating. But the interesting thing is we stayed at the Waldorf Astoria in New York City, and my mom planned a bunch of little things for us to do. And one thing we did is we went to NBC Studios, and we watched a game show being filmed, and Bill Cullen was the host. And when I just, I try to bring people on all different subjects, and when I came across you, I'm like, I got to get Adam on the program, especially you with Bill Cullen's name coming up. Just a little side note, but I've had a fascination with game shows since I've been a young kid, and since I saw how one was filmed when I was very, very young.
Oh, yeah. That would be – so let's see. You would have gone to New York in the early 1970s, right?
Right.
Well, okay, so that would have been 3 on a Match that you saw taping of.
I believe so. I believe it was. I'm getting older. I can't remember as good. I think it was, though.
Yeah, which is one of my more favorite shows among the ones he hosted. He hosted about 40 of them, so – it's quite a list of favorites among the ones that just Bill Cullen did. But, yeah, 3 on a Match is one of my favorites. And you're right, it is interesting to see the nuts and bolts of how a game show was done, especially back in that era when it was so much of it was, it looks like magic on the air, but manually operated and very, very basic behind the scenes. They had the prize board on 3 on a Match, and to sit there in the studio and see stagehands hustling behind the prize board to flip over the boxes as the contestants picked them must have been something. I have a friend out here in Los Angeles who attended Jeopardy with Art Fleming, the original version of Jeopardy, in the same building. And he said one of the memories that he'll have for the rest of his life was a contestant picking, geography for $10 and seeing this overweight stagehand with a cigarette dangling out of his mouth, ripping out the thing with $10 printed across it to reveal the clue underneath.
Exactly. Well, again, when you get an opportunity to sit at a taping, and of course nowadays with with modern, with things being more modern, I don't know if they do more green screen stuff, Adam, or not. But back then it was pretty crude. Yeah,
it's definitely more polished now, and it's that carries the risk of kind of losing the heart to it. It's kind of strange to say that, but I feel like lower technology stuff has a little bit of personality to it. That
I totally agree.
Stuff yeah.
I totally agree. What got you, Bill Cullen, very interesting individual. I just remembered as a little kid, I didn't know who Bill Cullen was. I just remembered he was kind of a short guy with a limp. And started digging into Bill, and pretty interesting character.
Yeah, he really was. What got me into him was, now I didn't get a chance to visit New York City in the early 70s. You have a few more years on me, but I began watching Bill in right at the end of his career, actually. I became hooked on a show of his called Hot Potato that was on NBC in 1984. And Hot Potato, I'll just go over the opening of the show very quickly. They had the light-up logo on stage with the name of the show, but the little touch to it was smoke came out of the logo as they lit it up. So the announcer would say, Hot Potato, and you'd hear this, and smoke would begin billowing out of the logo. And that's the kind of thing that's going to latch right onto a little kid's mind. So I watched Hot Potato every day to see that sign light up. And I was always into game shows from a really young age, but what stood out to me about Bill was that Bill didn't look like other game show hosts.
Right.
The other game show hosts that I grew up with were guys like Pat Sajak and Jim Perry and Wink Martindale, guys with 100 teeth and perfect hair, really good-looking, slick-talking, younger to middle-aged guys. And then watching Hot Potato, I just remember noticing that it was this really old guy in thick glasses. And there was just something I really liked about him. He seemed like an older relative. And so I was always a fan of Bill. And then as I got older, I came into the age of the Internet, and I discovered that game shows there's quite a game show subculture on the Internet. And I began learning more and more about Bill through various websites and message boards. And just found out over the years that he was a really, really neat guy, and he really was somebody who deserved to have a book written about him. And so I was the one to do it, with a lot of help from a lot of friends. The executor of Bill's estate, Fred Westbrook, helped me out. Bill's wife, Ann, was tremendously helpful. She lives down in Orange County now, and she was just thrilled about the project. And Matt Ottinger, who launched a Bill Cullen fan site about 15 years ago, and has had a lot of resources, was very generous in helping me out with it. But, it was just amazing putting this whole process together and getting that book written.
How did Bill get into, did he, what did he, I read some things about him, Adam, that I don't know if he was friends or an acquaintance of Groucho Marx. Talked about Bill Cullen a lot.
Groucho used to say that Bill was the second funniest man on television, which is the highest honor that you can get from Groucho Marx. No, Bill had an interesting path into show business. He started out as a mechanic. He was a big fan of radio during the 1930s, as everybody was. It was the only form of entertainment, pretty much, that and the afternoon matinees. But he was a big fan of radio and mastered doing impressions of radio announcers. So when he was repairing customers' cars at the auto shop, he would do impressions of local radio stars. And it caught the attention of the advertising salesman at a local station, and he just offered Bill a job. Bill got the job and kind of ran with it from there. He became a pretty big star in the Pittsburgh area, and decided to try his luck moving to New York and seeing if he could make a name in national radio. Got very lucky and got a job at CBS Radio as soon as he arrived in New York. And you were talking about remembering him as a short guy with a limp. Bill had polio as an infant, and it affected his walk. And Bill always thought that had been kind of key to his career, because it was his first big break. He came out to New York during World War II, and basically, Bill was always very modest about pointing this out. Because of World War II, everybody was leaving their jobs to go fight overseas in Germany and Japan, and basically CBS Radio needed somebody, and Bill got that job just because they knew that, on top of him having talent, with that bad leg, there was no chance of him getting drafted. So he built his career as a radio announcer, and it turned out that he just had a knack for game shows. He was there pretty much from the beginning of the era of game shows, and for about 40 years, he hosted them and did better than anyone.
Wow. Now, you said you worked. Did you work on Wheel of Fortune?
Yeah, I first moved out to Los Angeles. One of my early lucky breaks. And it's going to be a strange one. I landed this job at Wheel of Fortune because Fred, the game show agent that I was talking to you about earlier, is an avid collector of game show photos, and I had, and it kind of ties together with something else that we've already talked about, I had photos of Art Fleming that he didn't have. And he was so flattered that I just handed over these photos of Art Fleming that he didn't have that he took it upon himself to find me a job. And I landed a job working as a prize coordinator for Wheel of Fortune. It's one of the less glamorous jobs you can have in television. I sat at a desk all day, and basically I functioned as a telemarketer on behalf of Wheel of Fortune. I would call hotels and call airlines and get free tickets and get free hotel stays to put together the dream vacation the contestants went on Wheel of Fortune.
Interesting. Very interesting.
Yeah.
Well,
And it was a lot of fun. My boss was a former producer on Hollywood Squares who had a lot of stories about that show. And my last day on the job, they were very nice about this. They had to lay me off due to a budget cut. And my boss took me aside on the last day and said, normally if you stay at a job 25 years, you get a gold watch. Since you couldn't stay here 25 years, we're going to go ahead and give you the gold watch now. So I got a gold watch on my last day at Wheel of Fortune. So that was a very happy memory.
Wow. Wheel of Fortune has been running for quite some time, many, many years. I mean, as long as I can remember.
Yeah, 1975 it went on the air with Chuck Woolery and Susan Stafford. If you know those names, you
Yes.
are definitely a game show fan that knows his salt, It's been on the air for quite some time, and kind of the magic of it, even though people don't really like it, their favorite TV shows are tinkered with. Talking to one of the executives that I had a chance to talk with in my books, a man named Dan Fox, who was a former executive at NBC, he said the genius thing that they do with that show is that they tinker it a little bit every year, but they don't tinker with it so much that it becomes unrecognizable. Year after year after year, Wheel of Fortune is somehow a little bit different, but it's always spin the wheel, buy a vowel, solve a puzzle. So it's been just a masterstroke the way they do that show, and they just tinker with it enough to keep it interesting and keep it from getting in a rut without taking away the central core of the show.
Interesting. Well, and for our listeners out there, again, Adam has several books out. If you just look up his name, Adam Nedeff, and it's spelled Nedeff. I hope I'm pronouncing that right.
It's Nedeff, but I'm kind of at a point where every telemarketer has said it wrong, so I don't even notice when people say it wrong at this point. I wasn't going to bother.
You've got so
many.
Nedeff. You've got if you're into game shows or just even television history. I mean, there's just so much out there. When I came across Adam's site, I went through it. Adam, why don't you give out your website too? So if people want to get out there and tool around and look, I mean, you've just got there's a lot of entertainment. I mean, you could spend a lot of time and a lot of good old memories.
Yeah, well, at the moment, it's Game Show Utopia at game-show-utopia.net. I just bought another URL, so that's going to change. But for the moment, go ahead and enter that site, and I'll certainly splash something across the main page when the new URL comes in. But right now, it's game-show-utopia.net. And that's how a hobby turned into an obsession. I became a game show fan, so I began doing a game show fan site. And the fan site turned into making connections with other game show fans. Making connections turned into being able to write a book. And being able to write a book has sort of set me on this new path to becoming a game show historian. For whatever that honor is worth, whatever that title is worth, it's been an interesting journey getting there, and the website has been a big part of it.
Oh, well, again, there's so much when you start to dig into this stuff, when you start to dig into these shows and some of the the little nuances that people don't even realize. What is the show with the whammy?
Press Your Luck.
Press Your Luck. I remember seeing a program maybe a year or two ago about the guy that just kept winning and winning and winning and figured out that there was nothing magical about the board. It was a sequence, and he figured the sequence out. And then I believe he came forward and told him, this is how I won, how I was your biggest winner.
Yeah, it's the man's name was Michael Larson. And for those of you who Press Your Luck is kind of a funny show because it's the most beloved game show of all time that nobody remembers the name of. So if I'm saying Press Your Luck and your listeners out there don't know what Press Your Luck is, let's just say he was a contestant on Big Bucks, No Whammies. And that usually is what makes people's minds light up. But, the premise of the show, for people who haven't seen it, was a light would flash around a board with 18 squares on it, and you would hit your button to stop that light, and wherever the light landed, you won that prize or you won that cash. And also on the board there were whammies, and the whammies took away all your money. So Michael Larson was on the show after being unemployed for a couple of months and sitting there watching the show. And what he struck upon was the light wasn't flashing randomly. And what came out after it happened was this had been a concern of the producers when they first launched the show. It was, you have to remember, computer technology was still in the developmental stages in the early 1980s. And getting the lights to flash around randomly would require a more expensive computer system than a computer system that you could just program 5 or 6 patterns into. So CBS went with the cheaper computer, and they just programmed some predictable patterns into it because they figured nobody was going to memorize it. Well,
joke's on them. Michael Larson did exactly that. He memorized the way that the lights were flashing around the board. And hearing the accounts of the people that were in the studio that day, they said they actually figured out what Michael Larson had figured out very early in the taping. They said at about the point where he hit $20,000 and he announced he's going to keep playing, he's not going to pass his spins, he's not going to stop the game, everybody in the control room kind of sat back and figured out, oh no, he's done it. And so all they could do was just sit back and let him play the game, and he wound up taking them for $110,000.
Wow.
Just made a fortune on it. And the program that you watch, Big Bucks, which was a documentary about it, Peter Tamarkin, who was the host of Pressure Luck, said he was guilty of nothing more than being enterprising. For being able to figure that out, and for being able to figure out the patterns and get himself out to Los Angeles and get himself out on the show, he put so much effort into it that he deserved every penny of that $110,000. And I kind of agree with Peter Tamarkin on that.
Didn't they try to press charges on him, though? Didn't they try to get some of that back later on?
They tried to figure out a way to get to avoid paying him off. They went over, when you're a contestant on a game show, you have to fill out a lot of legal paperwork before you get out there. And they poured over his paperwork looking for any loophole, looking for anything that he did wrong, any violation that he committed so they could deny him the payoff. They couldn't find anything. And basically, they came to the conclusion that this is the same thing as counting cards in Vegas. A casino can ask you to leave if you count cards, but you can't be arrested for counting cards because how do you punish somebody? How do you make a law that says you're not allowed to pay attention? Right. And this was kind of the same thing. You can't really punish somebody for paying attention to the show. The truth was Press Your Luck had a completely beatable system, and all he did was sit down and figure out what they were doing wrong that he could take advantage of. So they looked for a way to hold it against him. They looked for a way to keep him from paying it off, but they just could not find anything that they could nail him for. So he got every bit of the $110,000.
Wow, interesting. I remember. I remember when that broke. I was watching it and never thought twice. Again, well, back then people didn't think that way. But yeah, interesting. I remember the guy again, the gentleman you mentioned, even said something to the fact that he drew it out on paper and just kept playing it over and over at home before he went on, and just said, "Hey, yeah, there's definitely a pattern to this."
Yeah.
What about
all of them?
What about just this is a question I've got for you, and actually one of our listeners wrote in with this question for you, Adam. These game shows, matter of fact, something came out in the news here just recently here in Salt Lake City. There was a contestant on The Price is Right. And this woman actually took it to the Better Business Bureau and actually asked for help here. She was on the show. She was a contestant. She won some prizes, but never got the prizes. And I've had other people write in several different questions. I'm just going to summarize them. Wanted me to ask you about taxes. Let's say that you win a car. Is there money that you have to come up with to get these prizes? Could you educate us a little bit on that? Because I think these are questions people want to know.
Yeah, first of all, this goes back to me having worked at the Price is Right. I briefly worked there and briefly worked in the prize department. Basically, the deal is they have 90 days to deliver the prizes to you after you've been on the show. I don't know anything about the story that you're quoting, but it's 90 days after air date, and basically the simple version of it is you don't get your payday until CBS has gotten their payday. Once all the money has come in from advertisers and that kind of thing, that's when they begin sending out the prizes. As far as the tax situation goes, any prizes that you win on game shows, that is income, that is taxable earnings. So really whatever you win on a game show, you shouldn't think of it as a freebie. You should just think of it as getting something at an extreme discount. You're going to be on the hook for some kind of payment, but certainly the taxes are going to be less than what you would pay for whatever you won. As far as cars go, it's kind of a funny situation mentioning winning a car because my roommate, prior to me ever working at The Price is Right, had been a contestant on The Price is Right. This was before we had even met, but he was a contestant on the show in, I believe, 2003 or 2004, and he won a $46,000 Cadillac. He kept the Cadillac for a couple of weeks because of the blue book value thing where, if you have it this long, but if you have it this long, then the value stays the same. So he just enjoyed having a Cadillac for a little while and then took it to a dealership, got cash for his Cadillac, used the cash to pay off the taxes, and then all the leftover money that he had, he used that to pay off his college tuition. So if you're enterprising about it, you can you can come away still a pretty big winner, even with taxes. One of the handy things, I will give you a nice little tip for how to deal with taxes if you're ever on a game show. What you're on the hook for when you win a prize on a game show is the manufacturer's suggested retail price. And if you've ever watched a game show, you know that the manufacturer's suggested retail price is usually quite a bit higher than what you would pay at a store.
Right.
It's right. What you're allowed to do is you can look for the prizes that you've won at a local store. If you can find something that's a match for what you won on that show, you can take a form down to the store, ask to speak to a manager, and get them to sign a form that says that we're selling this item for this much. If you can get them to sign off on a form that, yes, this item that we carry on a store is worth this much and not what you pay to, not the manufacturer's suggested retail price, then you're only on the hook for paying the taxes for the lower amount.
Okay.
So if you win a furniture set and it's worth $3,000 on The Price is Right, store manager signs a form that says, well, no, that's only an $1,800 furniture set, then you're only on the hook to pay taxes for an $1,800 prize instead of a $3,000 prize.
Right. Gotcha.
So that's one tip that can help you out if you're ever on a game show. But yes, you are on the hook for taxes. It is taxable income. So I don't want to say caveat emptor. That doesn't exactly apply. But yeah, there is some extra work to do if you're ever on a game show.
So if you win a car on The Price is Right, you're not driving it home from California. It's going to come a few months.
No. Anything that you win, they will ship it to you. Or in the case of cars, very often what they'll do is they'll give you something akin to a gift certificate, where it's, this is the make and model of the car that you won, and these are the options it's supposed to come with, and you can try to match it up with a local dealer if they're not able to send it to you.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Let me ask you, Price is Right, of course, Bob Barker was the host of that for a long time. A lot of controversy surrounded him with him and his models.
Yeah.
So we had a listener that's asked if you would talk on that a little bit. Was he the ladies' guy of the day?
Apparently, yes. It's I have to choose my words carefully because again, I wasn't there. I can only
Sure.
I can speculate based on the information that's out there. But yeah, Bob liked to have a little fun back there. I don't think he's necessarily denied that. The way he sees it and the way he tells the story is a little different from what some of the models have said. I do know that there's a book out right now by a model named Kathleen Bradley, who was on the show for quite a long time. And there's actually there's talk right now that the Showtime Network is going to be turning her book into a TV series about life behind the scenes of a TV game show. So there's certainly some juicy stuff from behind the scenes from people who are definitely there. But again, I'm not the best person to talk to. I'm not dodging the question. It's just
no.
There are better people to ask than me.
No, definitely no. Fair answer. Now, looking through your books, you've got a book out. I believe this is your newest one called "The Matchless Gene Rayburn." I used to love Match Game. One thing here I think they're in a lot of different states on regular digital television. There's so many new stations. There's a game show channel that just popped up, and it's great because it has all these old game shows on it. If anybody here, at least in the Salt Lake City area, I think it's 32.4 or something. It has some of the real old time stuff. And again, it's so crude, it's funny. But Match Game, of course, is on in the afternoon. And it's pretty amazing, Adam, the things that they got away with saying back then, you wouldn't even try to attempt to put on television today.
Yeah. First of all, just because I have an interest in helping that channel grow, I'll say the name of the channel is Buzzer. So
Buzzer,
wherever you're listening to this from, it's called Buzzer TV. It may not be on the air in your area yet because it did just start and it's still growing. But absolutely look around and see if you have a channel called Buzzer because it really is a wonderful little endeavor. It's overseen by Fremantle Media, which is the company that owns the Mark Goodson-built Bodman Library, as well as a few other game show properties. But it is just a wonderful little 24-hour trip down memory lane. Match Game was a wonderful show. It's definitely a product of its time, as you said. There's definitely conversations on there that you would not have on television today. But that was kind of the charm of it. It was stuff that definitely wasn't being said on television back then, for the most part. When you look at daytime TV today, with the soap operas and the court shows and the daytime talk shows, it seems like there's no subject matter off limits. So what needs to be explained in context for the time was in the 1970s, daytime TV was very, very safe. Daytime TV did not look to make any kind of waves. And then along comes the match game, where the premise of the show is Gene Rayburn is going to read a question, a fill-in-the-blank phrase like, the Jolly Green Giant has a giant green blank. And these 6 celebrities who have drinking their lunch are now going to sit down and write answers to fill in that blank, and they're going to compare answers. And they'll have, they'll have questions that are sexual in nature. Occasionally a drug reference comes up. Occasionally references to drinking come up. It was just very, very blunt and very, very no-holds-barred for that time period, for the 1970s in daytime television. And the funny thing is, even in today's environment, it still kind of holds up. There's a lot of charm to seeing some of these people, and it's a nice little time capsule of what pop culture looked like back then and what people were talking about back then and what the boundaries of comedy were back then, because the fun thing of watching Match Game is watching them tap dance around the obvious answer and looking for some other way to make these double entendres work.
Right.
It really was just amazing television and a show that got very, very lucky. Gene Rayburn used to talk in his later years about how Match Game was a rotten format for a game show. And it really was kind of a weak premise for a show if you're just looking at the concept of the game and the rules of it. But it had the perfect question writers. It had the perfect host, to say the least. It had the perfect panelists, Richard Dawson and Charles Nelson Riley, Betty White, Brett Summers, all of these wonderful, wonderful people who gave the show exactly what it needed and just made it something really special and really magical. It's not something that I think you can do today because I don't think lightning will strike twice. I don't think you can ask for that kind of luck with putting together the same show again. But in the 1970s, Match Game was just the game show.
Now, with your book, The Matchless Gene Rayburn, does it kind of go into his life's history or the show's history? Or
It really does, and one of the interesting things was Gene was proud of Match Game. He was happy that he was recognized for something, but it's almost a disservice to refer to Gene Rayburn as game show host Gene Rayburn because he did so much other stuff. Among other things, he pioneered morning radio and he pioneered late-night talk shows. In the late 1940s, when television started to take over and radio kind of freaked out and needed to figure out what's radio going to be now because television is going to take this over, Gene Rayburn and another disc jockey named Dee Finch kind of changed the template for radio. They began doing a 4.5-hour morning radio show called Anything Goes, and it was music interspersed with comedy sketches and publicity stunts, news, weather, sports. It was what you think of today as a morning drive radio show. And Gene Rayburn essentially invented that format. And then fast forward to 1954, NBC comes up with the idea for The Tonight Show. The Tonight Show gets on the air. And Gene Rayburn is there for the beginning of that. He was the original man. He was the second banana on the original Tonight Show with Steve Allen. So Gene Rayburn was there on the ground floor of 2 forms of entertainment that are still there to this day and persist to this day and are still popular after all these years. And he just never got the recognition for that.
Interesting. What do you think about Chuck Barris?
Chuck Barris. You know, it's an interesting thing when you look at TV now and look at what Chuck Barris did then. Even if you don't like reality TV, you have to hand it to Chuck Barris for having his finger on the pulse of the nation. He really had a mind for what people wanted deep down. His breakout creation was the dating game, which had people very openly, very blatantly flirting with each other.
Right.
And it was just the right show at the right time with the sexual revolution. And then kind of capitalizing on the same mindset, the same attitudes, he immediately follows that with the Newlywed Game, where it's married couples admitting things that you would not admit to your next-door neighbors and saying it publicly just for the sake of having a chance at winning a refrigerator.
Right.
And, you know, fast-forwarding years later, there's The Gong Show. And you see The Gong Show today in American Idol, or what's left of American Idol anyway. And you see it in The X Factor. You see it in America's Got Talent. Pretty much every show like that that's come along in the last 40 years was based off The Gong Show. You look at the other things he did. He always said he never tried to make his shows out to be more than they were. He always used the term popcorn for the mind. There wasn't that much substance to his shows, but they really had a way of latching onto what people were thinking and really giving the general public what they wanted. And he wasn't afraid to experiment. He wasn't afraid to try. Even his bad shows are interesting. If you ever get a chance to look at some of his failed shows, like The Parent Game, The Game, How's Your Mother-in-Law, all shows that you've probably never heard of, they all came and went very, very quickly. But just the attitude of Chuck Barris, where he was willing to try something different and try something unusual and try something that was going to tap into some mindset that no other TV show was tapping into, it really was amazing stuff.
I thought the guy was really a genius. The $1.98 beauty show, or I mean, no, it was, and you know, of course they did the Gong Show movie, which was, you know, kind of what everybody wanted to see, but yet kind of gave you that behind the scenes, you know, the behind the scenes feel of the show and all the crap that went with it. One of our listeners writes in, we've got a group of kids up at the University of Utah that listen to us all the time, and Tracy writes in, she says, Adam, what are your thoughts on Chuck Barris being an assassin? Do you think that is just a publicity stunt, or there's something to that?
What was her name again?
Tracy.
Tracy, I'm not at liberty to reveal what I know about Chuck Barris.
Okay.
No, I have asked people that worked with Chuck Barris. Chuck, they don't believe it. And honestly, I don't either. And I think Roger Ebert was onto something where it says something about Chuck Barris's mindset and his personal psyche that he's making up a story about being an assassin because he thinks people will be more impressed by him. I think, you know, game shows in general don't get the best respect. They're not the most well-appreciated genre on television. And Mark Goodson, for example, always sort of had self-confidence issues that came out from a lot of people that worked with him, just because as much success as he had, it was success in a field that people didn't think highly of, at least not in this country. And I think Chuck Barris was the same thing. He had these brilliant, revolutionary ideas that turned him into a millionaire and turned him into a multimillionaire. But, you know, the critical barbs and the, you know, the complaints from viewer groups and parent groups about how his shows were bad for America, eventually that's going to take its toll. And I think his story about being an assassin was just some sort of outlet to make people see him in a different light, to make people think twice about having a critical word about him. I don't think he was an assassin, but I'm certainly among the group that says he deserves a lot more respect than he gets. I think he did wonderful stuff in broadcasting.
Oh, I do too. But you know what's crazy, Adam? When you think about it, I too believe it was a publicity stunt. But then on the other hand, you know, you look at people, again, some of the other names, people talk about Julia Child being a spy. You know, when you think about it, sometimes it's so crazy that maybe there is something to it. From the fact that a lot of these personalities, like Julia Child, they were walking in and out of different countries during wartime. Nobody questioned anything. You know, how do you know if a guy like him, as crazy as he is, or comes across as crazy as he is, has carte blanche and is maybe doing something like that? I tend to doubt it. But, you know,
that's true.
There's a hint that says you never know, and who would ever believe it?
The greatest trick that Chuck Barris ever performed was convincing people it didn't exist.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah, it's the one you least suspect. So it's definitely fodder out there, and you know, there's definitely the logic presented in the movie version of Confessions of a Dangerous Mind. It is true that ABC requested a chaperone go along for all the dates that they gave away on the dating game. And as the show grew more popular, they got more and more lavish and more elaborate with the dates that they were sending people on. So it's definitely, that's what makes the story so interesting, is there is definitely a logic to this story. He's not just pulling it out of thin air that, hey, I killed people. There's definitely a logical thread through his life story where maybe it could have happened. It's possible. Again, I don't believe it, but that's what makes it so intriguing, is you're 99% sure that Chuck Barris is lying, but it's that other 1% that really makes you pay attention.
Exactly. What about shows like, now another long-running one, and I believe Monty Hall, I believe he's still alive.
Yes, he is.
He's got to be up there. I don't even know if he makes public appearances anymore. But
93 years old, and he actually does. Out here in Los Angeles, he still does a lot of philanthropic efforts. You'll see him out in public quite a bit. Very, very active and very, very able and very out there for a 94-year-old.
Wow. But his show, Let's Make a Deal. Now, it came back again with different hosts, and it seems to be doing pretty well in the morning slots.
Yeah, it's come along really well. It's an interesting show just for the fact that there's so little meat on the bone, so to speak. Right. Mark Goodson had a wonderful term for it, and Mark Goodson, who had nothing to do with the creation of Let's Make a Deal, was speaking in high praise when he said this. But he said the remarkable thing about Let's Make a Deal is that it really is just 30 minutes or 60 minutes of somebody flipping a coin. And that's really what it is. It's luck-based television. It's, do you want this or do you want that? Do you want the box? Do you want the curtain? And even the games that they have on the current version of Let's Make a Deal, where they've kind of got it like The Price is Right now, where it's a series of mini games. Even now, they keep it very, very luck-based. There's very, very little skill on Let's Make a Deal. But it's all in the presentation. It's so intriguing and so entertaining the way that they do it. And they polish up the fact that it's a coin toss, and they kind of take your mind off of that. And it really just kind of takes advantage of the vicarious mindset that people have when they watch game shows, where you're kind of plugging yourself in there. You're not necessarily pretending that you're in the studio or anything like that. But when you watch a game show like Let's Make a Deal, you're definitely thinking about what you would do if you were there and Monty was offering you that box, and you're thinking about what you would do if somebody handed you $1,500 and how you'd handle that if somebody offered to take that $1,500 back and give you a curtain instead. It's just a wonderful, amazing show the way that they present it, and it's, longevity is kind of the proof of that. It's a 50-year-old show now, and it still works.
It does. It does. What's your favorite show, Adam? Out of the whole montage, what's your favorite one?
Boy, oh boy. You're asking me to pick one, and that's a mean thing to do to me. It changes from week to week just depending on what games I've seen recently. I've always had a fondness in my heart for the $25,000 Pyramid. That was one of my addictions when I was a kid. And you were talking about my side business, Game Enterprises, where we stage live game shows, and one of our favorite ones to do is the $25,000 Pyramid. And that's just a fantastic show. It really is. It's fast-paced. It's easy to pick up on. It's that perfect combination of easy to play but impossible to master.
Right.
It's here's a word. You can say anything you want to describe it short of accidentally blurting out the word. And yet somehow it can be difficult and it can be a challenge sometimes, and you can get tripped up over the simplest words.
Yeah, very true. Well, and I look at some of those shows, the later ones, big-time celebrities that they've run through that. You don't see that anymore. The one show on CBS, I can't think of Craig Ferguson's new thing.
Celebrity Name Game, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, of course, he brings on big-time, current actresses and actors. But some of those shows like Pyramid and the others, I mean, it was kind of cutting edge. You had top name people appearing on those shows.
It really was. The success of some of the past game shows really allowed them to get some talent. For example, $25,000 Pyramid during the 1970s, it's like a time capsule of primetime TV in that era, where they had, for example, they had Kirk versus Spock week. They had William Shatner versus Leonard Nimoy for an entire week of shows on that thing. David Letterman, right at the beginning of his television career, did a lot of Pyramid. And the primetime version, I believe Freddie Prinze Jr. did the primetime version, or not Freddie Prinze Jr., Freddie Prinze, his father, Chico and the Man, did it. But yeah, just an impressive array of stars. The king of the game show celebrities had to be the Hollywood Squares, the original version with Peter Marshall, which got some amazing celebrities. George C. Scott and Alice Cooper did the original version of Hollywood Squares. Who would ever imagine that you'd see George C. Scott or Alice Cooper on a game show? Never. Yeah. Just the fact that it could attract that kind of star power. Red Fox did that show a lot.
Paul Lynde.
Paul Lynde in Center Square after all his years on Bewitched and on Broadway. Just the amazing array of stars. Kind of the fun fact about the Hollywood Squares panel, the golden days of that show, Charlie Weaver, who you might remember.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Sure. Yeah, Charlie Weaver. I didn't know this until a couple years ago when I started researching the books, and I found out Charlie Weaver is the grandfather of David Arquette. He's the patriarch of that family, basically. So pretty much every celebrity that you know with the last name Arquette, he's their grandfather or their father.
Right.
So he kind of started off a comedy dynasty.
Carl writes in for you, Adam. He says, Adam, Press Your Luck, didn't that return again recently and then go away?
Yeah, very brief. I was disappointed by that, too, but very briefly, Game Show Network, for about 2 seasons, did a revival of a show called Whammy, the all-new Press Your Luck. Funnily enough, I'm actually wearing a promotional T-shirt from that version of the show right now. But it was run by some very talented people who I'm lucky enough to call friends now. It was run by a man named Bob Bowden and Mandela Logan, who does a lot of work with current game show productions. And just a very talented staff of people put it together. It was very faithful to the original version. Just a wonderfully entertaining show. I don't know what went wrong that caused it to go off the air again. But I certainly enjoyed it for the 2 seasons that was on the air. But I'm sure it's on YouTube. So the version was called Whammy, the all-new Press Your Luck, if you want to go look for it.
Well, and again, like you said, with Buzzer, with that channel, if it comes to, I'm not sure if it's going to be. I know here in town, in Salt Lake, like I said, it's on regular television. I don't know if it'll ever see its way to cable or Netflix or Roku. But for people here in town, check it out. It's amazing if you enjoy the old game shows. Again, compared to some of the garbage that we see on TV nowadays, it's a lot of fun, especially those old game shows out of the 50s and 60s, the really early stuff. Again, it's amazing television for its time.
Yeah, it is a nice little blast from the past, especially the earlier shows. It's so interesting how simple some of the early days of television were. And it's fascinating to watch Buzzer and see the reruns of What's My Line, where the show was all it was sit down, show the audience at home what somebody does for a living, and then 4 people ask yes or no questions to figure out what their job is.
Right.
And that was on the air for 17 years, and they never did anything to spruce it up or make it more interesting or make it more than what it was. For 17 years on prime time on CBS, people sat down and asked yes or no questions to figure out what somebody's job was. And it's that little X factor. You can't explain what makes it work, but it just does. And somehow that simple guessing game was amazing television. It was a pop culture phenomenon in its time, and watching it now, it's just an amazing time capsule of that era.
Right, and the whole show being sponsored by one sponsor, nothing fancy, just a piece of paper, Gillette, or a shave cream, or a hairspray, or a razor, or whatever. Yeah. Simplistic stuff. Simplistic sets, I get a kick out of that channel. Going through some of your other stuff, Adam, which I have interest in too, is you wrote a couple books called The Name on the Marquee, stuff that addresses the World Wrestling Federation, or now what, WWE. Boy, talk about another genre that has so much to it.
Yeah, you're the first person that's ever interviewed me that brought up those books. I've been writing as a hobby for the past 7 years for a website called 411 Mania, and all it is me watching old wrestling TV shows from the 1980s, and I just began compiling my reviews and putting them out on Kindle so people have them to read whenever they want. But, I love that era. I love the era that I grew up watching, and what's funny is I began watching around 1989 or so, and for a long time I was a perfect example of how well the World Wrestling Federation marketed to my demographic at that time. It's no other wrestling on the face of the earth mattered. And now I'm an adult, and basically my wrestling fandom as an adult has been going back and getting caught up on all the wrestling that I ignored when I was a kid.
Right.
And so that's been a fun journey writing those books for the past 7 years and just discovering stuff that I didn't know about, stars that I was familiar with, seeing matches and feuds that I hadn't heard anything about, or matches and feuds that I had heard about and always wondered about. But that's just been a fun trip, and it's been a real thrill to take people on that journey with me, whatever audience that I have for those reviews.
Well, there's a lot to it, and of course, the thing is that, I think that the wrestling stuff, of course, it's just another form of a soap opera. And the storyline goes from show to show. And, of course, guys like Vince McMahon and other people have made billions of dollars off of it. But in the early days of wrestling, I grew up in Chicago my whole life. I moved out here to Utah for my job years ago. But when I was a young kid, my uncle used to take me to Hammond, Indiana, a place called the Hammond Civic Center. And we would watch these wrestling matches, and literally, Adam, there was maybe at 300 people in this auditorium, and the big names were there. The Bobby Heenans were there. The Hulk Hogans were there. I mean, all these people they were nobodies. And, you know, you'd watch the show from 8 o'clock until 10 o'clock. We'd leave, and we used to go, of course, being in Chicago, we'd go to White Castle Hamburgers and get something on the way home. And here coming out of the package, the liquor store, would be half of these guys that you just saw wrestle, Vern Gagne and that. Yeah, coming out of the liquor store, all beat up in the dead of winter. It was just interesting. It was kind of funny and crazy. And when you look at what it is today, it's absolutely amazing because it was just a bunch of bums having fun.
Yeah. It's funny. I've had the chance to listen to some of the stories that the guys had about those trips after the show. I'll tell you what you probably saw coming out of the liquor store was preparations for something called a baloney blowout, which was 4 wrestlers would rent out a 2-bedroom hotel room, and they would flip coins to figure out who got to sleep on the mattress and who slept on the box spring. The box. They would move the mattress off the box spring, and that's how they figured out where everyone slept. And somebody would go to the store and get some liquor or some booze, and they would get bologna because bologna was the cheapest food that filled you up most. So you went to the store, you bought bologna, bread, and beer, and that completely filled you up for very, very little investment. And that's how you maximize your dollar as a wrestler on the road. But the stories from those days that you didn't have any incidents with fans, just out of curiosity, during the shows in Hammond, Indiana, did you?
Oh yeah,
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah, it was. Yeah. It was. I mean, I remember back then. Mean Gene Okerlund. He was an announcer, but then he would also do karate matches, and he worked in Chicago as a car sales guy. He did car ads. Again, some big names back then in Hammond. Again, Bobby Heenan, Ric Flair. But these guys were nothing back then. And again, they wrestled to crowds of literally 150, 200 people, maybe, if that. You'd sit in the bleachers in the dead of winter. It was crazy. And again, to look at it, what it is today. Is just it's just crazy. It absolutely is.
And the funny thing is, those small shows are still going on. They're called indie promotions now.
Right. But
high school gyms all over America, you can still see a show with 100 people in the audience, if that. And it's the same thing. You're seeing people who are going to be bigger stars in 10 years. And it's neat to be able to say that you were there and you got to watch them evolve.
Oh yeah, and of course, at the end of the day, it's all based on storylines. But I'll tell you what, to the average guy like myself, to the average marshmallow, as you know, Adam, those guys they'd kill you in 10 seconds. I mean, they are athletes beyond belief. To see what those guys are put through, it's amazing. Again, to our audience, God, the hour went way too quick, Adam. You can look up Adam Nedeff and just do Game Show Aficionado or Game Shows, and all his books are out on Amazon. Do you have any other new books coming out, Adam, in the near future?
I'm working on a couple right now. I'm working on a book about a man named Dennis James, who was the first game show host, in essence, on television, and kind of tying together my two interests. In addition to being the first game show host on television, he was the first wrestling commentator on television. So I've been collaborating with his family on a book about him, and I've got 2 other books in the pipeline that I can't discuss at the moment, but they'll definitely be out there on Amazon. So bookmark that page right now, and eventually you'll see the updates on it.
Well, that's awesome. Hey, I want to thank you for being here with us tonight, and I'd also like to know if I keep in touch and down the road, maybe in the summertime or something, we get you back on again.
Definitely, I'd love to. This has been a lot of fun.
Okay, my friend. Well, good luck again, and thank you so much for being here. I know you're busy. I appreciate you taking time, and I'm going to pick up a few of your books and looking forward to it.
Definitely. Thank you very much.
Okay, Adam. Take care. Good night. Bye-bye.
Good night.